Hi, my name's Dr. McGarry from the Environmental Learning Research Centre in South Africa. I am sharing today some work we've done looking at the different roles and responsibilities of researchers in contemporary times, particularly around research for development or scholar activism or pracademia. So just to share, the transgressive learning research network was very interested in this idea of plural forms of knowing around the boundary crossing work that's needed to happen in research today, and also for the ways in which we're having to develop new generative approaches to research. We worked in various contexts in the global south and in the north, in 9 countries, and these are the 9 countries. And then our sister network, Acknowledge, also worked in 6 different countries. But today I really wanted to look at this idea of moving from more academic, not just focusing on academic rigor, but also the idea of political rigor, which we got the concept from Boras, and then further developed it in this paper and a methodology, a social learning methodology. And it really looks at this idea of the ethical guidelines currently used by universities may be inadequate to address questions of political rigor. And this idea for ongoing reflexive, iterative, and co-developed meaning making in our research is critical. So yeah, it means being politically informed and thorough and sensitive and nuanced and timely and relevant in your work. We looked at this concept of tarot and trying to create a tool in which we could practice forms of political rigor and iterative, reflexive ethics making and reflexive justice. So through Acknowledge mainly, we were able to facilitate a learning process with all the activists that form part of the academic activists for co-production of knowledge for environmental justice. This was one of the projects we did in Lebanon, and people were able to kind of frame and start exploring the kinds of roles and responsibilities they're having to play. And we use collage as one of the art making processes. And so from this, we were able to develop a methodology, Leah, Lena, and I, and we were able to take it to other countries. We facilitated this in Colombia, in Canada, in South Africa, and in India, and Spain. And from these findings, we were able to develop this paper. So this is the paper. You can find it on Ecological Economics. And we identify in this paper 7 different kind of archetypes. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There's many, many more, but it's just to demonstrate the different types of roles. And since publishing this paper, we've identified many more and aim to create an actual deck of cards that will have, it's kind of a game that you can play for a kind of a reflexive process and thinking about your ethics and political rigor in your research. But these are just some of them. The first in the paper is the postnormal scientist, which is kind of this need that we're having to venture into the unknown and move kind of beyond our boundaries and limits. And what does that mean for researchers now? So there's the postnormal scientist, or the fool. There's the indigenous scholars who teach us how we can do research in culturally embedded ways and what we need to unlearn and let go of to do kind of more decolonial research, and what it means to not just give voice, because we can't give voice, people have voices already, but what does it mean to be a researcher that can create a platform in which voices can be heard? So it's very much about allyship. Then there's the eccentric or anti-oppressive researcher, which kind of brings focus towards positionality and power relationships within your research. And the relationships, the kind of relationality and reflexivity that's needed. This was very much driven by queer theory and a lot of queer researchers. Then there's the co-conspirator, which was very much inspired by the work of Njaro Kulundu, who's been developing a critical African pedagogy, liberatory pedagogy in South African education for social and environmental justice. And she realized as a researcher that she was more of a co-conspirator, that she was deeply immersed and often implicated in the movements that she was working with. And what does that mean for the ethics and the political rigor needed? And also in the development of counter-hegemonic research methodologies. Then there was the responsible participant, which was driven very much from my PhD research and postdoctoral research around kind of embodied practice and what it means to be a responsible participant in not just in society, but also in facilitating research, also research that might be interventionist, and how does one practice that? Looking at questions of parity, reflexivity, empathy, and creative practice. There's the critical comrade who looks at both the synergies and potential tensions and works very much as a comrade, but is also able to point out blind spots with kindness and with care. We can often get critiques that don't do that with kindness and care, and it's a very delicate space, and we must also recognize the huge amount of emotional labor it takes to be a researcher in social and environmental justice processes and in transdisciplinary processes, particularly because it is so existential. Then there's the slow and careful scholar, and I know I'm rushing through this presentation to be within 5 minutes, but just to say that the importance of taking things slow and carefully and building caring relationships, and also to be careful with the demands of the neoliberal university and how does one take care of one's own mental and physical health. These are the two projects that developed this paper, Acknowledge and the Transgressive Learning Network, and I highly recommend you check out both websites.